I felt invincible. I can only describe the mood as sexual.
Or imagine the quacking duck.
The movie begins with Jo telling her story to a man named Seligman. She continues telling her story, starting from where she believed her struggle with nymphomania started. However, as her story goes on, more complex and sinister details about her life come to light. She tells Seligman that he will never be able to relate to her because he has never experienced such physical intimacy. However, he convinced her that he is a good fit to be her listener because of his inexperience, which makes him neutral. From the time she was 12 years old until her addiction peaked and cost her both her husband and her son, Jo then starts to outline the phases of her addiction to Seligman. Jo tells Seligman that when she was 12 years old, she had a field trip in the mountains, and in a flashback she finds her younger self lying on the mountains and suddenly has this vision of two women in front of her as she floats up and has her first climax. She is convinced that the two women she has seen are variations of the Virgin Mary, but Seligman then tells her that it's blasphemous, although the women she has seen might have been an escort woman from Babylon, riding a Nimrod in the form of a bull, and Valeria Messalina, a wife of Roman Emperor Claudius, who is also known as the most notorious nymphomaniac in history. She then recalls the time with her husband, Jerome, back when he was her boyfriend, claiming that they used to have fun together. Her husband tried to support her, but his attempts were never successful, and her actions ultimately drove him away. Her husband, Jerome, was always aware of Jo's appetite for physical intimacy. But as they got married, he came to accept the fact that he was unable to fulfill Jo's needs, and even gave her a pass to explore other partners. Later, Jo, posing as a piano instructor, set out to find potential partners with whom she could further explore her desires. She took advantage of her car breaking down to start a conversation that eventually led to a sharing of interests. Despite her inability to engage in physical intimacy, Jo became negligent with her birth control methods. She became unexpectedly pregnant as a result of her negligence, which presented many difficulties. She experienced serious emotional and physical issues as her pregnancy went on, which made her already challenging situation even more stressful. She had to manage a challenging and overwhelming situation as a result of these issues, which not only had an impact on her health, but also necessitated medical attention. Jerome was becoming suspicious and envious of Jo, despite his understanding of her predicament, which prevents her from experiencing intimacy unless there is some kind of intense encounter and pain involved. That, however, didn't stop Jo from going on a quest to find something more intimate. She eventually found someone named Kay through her search, who works in the field of various erotic practices or role-playing involving dominance, discipline, and other things. After multiple rounds of testing, Jo finally succeeded in passing Kay's rigorous evaluations, proving herself worthy of being one of Kay's subjects. Kay proceeded to get ready for the procedure with a sense of resolve, and even gave her instructions. She made sure she had all the tools she would need for the procedure by carefully gathering them all. She carefully followed each instruction to the letter, paying attention to even the smallest details to guarantee the procedure would be carried out flawlessly. Her dedication to the task reflected her commitment to the project, and she was fully ready to proceed with the next phase. As the sessions progressed, Kay's punishments grew progressively harsher, pushing Jo to the brink of her endurance. Kay's tactics grew more brutal each time, making Jo face not just her deepest desires, but also the overwhelming helplessness that accompanied them. Jo felt as though she was losing control with every encounter. Caught in a vicious cycle where Kay's influence seemed to weaken her own will. Despite the emotional and physical strain, she found herself drawn to Kay's sophisticated approach, admiring the calculated precision with which Kay handled every situation. Kay's demeanor, a perfect blend of authority and refinement, added an alluring complexity to the dynamic, leaving Jo both captivated and unsettled by the depth of Kay's control. Things began to take a strange and unsettling turn when Jo, still grappling with her internal conflict, started leaving her home to attend meetings with Kay, leaving her son alone. At first, she did so hesitantly, her mind filled with doubts, but over time, the pattern became more familiar, and she started repeating it without thinking twice. One day, while she was out attending one of her meetings, her son woke up and, still groggy, wandered to the open balcony. The snowstorm outside muffled everything except the loud hum of an ice-removing truck. He was mesmerized by the sound, but it also put him in a dangerous position, standing so close to the edge. Jerome came home unexpectedly, and upon seeing their son alone on the balcony, panic surged through him. His heart raced as he rushed to the boy, who was dangerously close to falling. Anger mixed with fear as he realized what had happened. He could feel his temper rising, but instead of confronting Joe in the moment, he swallowed his rage, knowing that lashing out would only make things worse. On the next scene, Joe and Jerome are sitting by the fire, and Jerome starts asking Joe questions about whether or not she still has feelings for him or not. He started showing violent behaviors, and even mentioned that if she has plans to leave for one of her meetings, she may not ever lay eyes on him or her son again. He then leaned in for a kiss, which left Joe feeling numb. She went to her son's crib and started crying as she knows what comes next. And the feeling of guilt of leaving her only son for her unresolved fantasies made her break in tears. Jerome furiously told her to say goodbye to her son, and even tried to manipulate her into staying by implying that she shouldn't do this on Christmas Day. But Joe already made up her mind, so she picked up her coat and left. After the unsettling incident, Joe, still shaken but determined, presented herself to Kay. However, as she stood before him, it was clear that something was off. Kay, usually perceptive and composed, couldn't help but notice the strange behavior she was exhibiting. There was an uncomfortable tension in place of her usual poise, and her words lacked the conviction they usually had. He offered to give her a gift after refusing her kiss. The gift was full of excruciating pain, but also for the first time since she was a little girl of 12 years old, where she initially lost her sense of intimacy. She finally felt that sense of pleasure that emerged from intimacy. But for her, it was the brutal punishment that caused her this pleasure. Joe reveals to Seligman that after that she has lost all contacts to her son, and that Jerome has out him in a foster home, which she anonymously sends money to. After that, they have an in-depth discussion about her encounters with Kay and the different ways he presented punishment. Seligman gave his opinion about the technicalities and the ideology he thinks Kay is using. Later that day, she was called to the office by her boss, who discussed her concerns about the rumors that have been circulating regarding her behavior, and asked if she was interested in the spouses of her co-workers, which she admitted without denying a single allegation. Her boss then demands her to join support groups that are established for those who have the same condition as her. Joe was facing more problems, and it had been a year since she lost contact with her husband and son, yet she somehow managed to get pregnant because of her negligent behavior about birth controls. She goes to a hospital and demands to have the baby removed. The doctor noticed her being emotional during the examination and suggested she get an informative consultation about the procedure, but she was uncooperative and frustrated.
I know what I want.
She then decides to do the procedure by herself, using the common medical procedure she had learnt in medical school. The process was very painful, yet she successfully removed the baby without any anesthesia. In the support group she was in, she was advised to remove any objects in her surroundings that might make her think of her addiction and trigger her in a way. She did exactly as she was told when she got back home, and basically tried to get rid of incentives and reduce exposure. Even though she got rid of everything, she was still unable to resist her desire and cried in surrender. The next day, she went to her support group to celebrate her 3 weeks away from her addiction, in which she was given a chance to give a speech. She gave an unexpected speech confronting the people in her group and even called out the therapist by claiming her empathy is a lie and that she is simply working for a society that doesn't want to face her kind. She made it clear that she doesn't want to get better and that she owns her addiction proudly.
I am a nymphomaniac, and I love myself for being one.
In her search for a new job, she comes across a guy who claims to have a job for her and says that her qualifications are excellent and wants to give her the job. He suggested that she start her own business with his help and walk her through the roles she will be having, which are putting pressure on individuals in which the clients will have the choice of providing money in order not to have their secrets revealed, which he referred to as debt collection. She will be assigned 2 thugs and will operate based on this process. Her business grew as she completed each assignment she was given to perfection, but as she was getting older, she was told that she was in need of a successor and provided a potential target, which she later can change into a successor. Joe meets a young, impressionable woman named P during her descent, and she chooses to mentor her. She teaches P how to manipulate men, mirroring her own past. But when P's admiration develops into rivalry, their relationship becomes poisonous. Any hope Jo had of making amends with her husband is dashed when P seduces Jerome, marking the culmination of jealousy and betrayal. Jo made plans to leave the town after what transpired between Jerome and P. She went to the mountain where she had her first experience to bid it a symbolic farewell. She had nothing to lose at this point, so she grabbed P's gun, which she had taken from her, and hid in a spot, patiently waiting for Jerome and P to arrive. They arrived, and as she saw them kissing, she grew impatient and shot the gun. Unfortunately, she didn't load the gun properly, so she ended up shooting an empty gun. He defends herself against Seligman, leaving his fate unknown. The story almost comes to an end as Jo talks about the whole experience, and Seligman, who has been a patient and non-judgmental listener, comforts her by saying that this pressure of being a mother who left her children because of desire, and the burden of guilt that was weighing on her, was unfair, and that almost most of her actions were justificable. Thinking she has found a real friend, she gets ready to sleep. But Seligman, who had described himself as someone who had never experienced physical intimacy before, and who says he is somewhere on a spectrum that includes no romantic, spiritual, or emotional attraction to other people, walks into her room and tries to attack her, justifying his actions by pointing to her long history. Jo gets up in response to his attack, pulls out a gun, and shoots Seligman. As Jo leaves the apartment at the end of the movie, themes of betrayal and the ongoing objectification she experiences, even from people she trusts, are highlighted. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.